Welcome everyone to another episode of Kiwi Talks. My guest today is probably best known for his tenure at Valve, working on games like Half-Life 2, Portal 2, Left 4 Dead, Counter-Strike, the list goes on. He's currently working on his game, A Little Kitty, Big City. I'd like to welcome Matt T. Wood. How you doing?
Hey Reese, how's it going?
Good, good. I want to make sure that I emphasize the T because there's actually quite a few Matt Woods.
There
I've
is,
noticed.
isn't there?
There
Yeah,
is.
that's why I had to start using the T. Yeah,
Yeah, you
quite
don't
a
want
few.
someone mistaking you for someone else. You gotta get that credit, man.
It was only because I don't actually. Yeah, it's so weird, because I don't go by Matt T Wood other than like credits on video games, right? That's pretty much the only reason that T exists.
So
You know.
how did that come about? When did you figure out that you actually had to start putting T in your credits?
Um, I think let's see. The first credit it. How was I credited? Let me think for a minute. So I worked on Max Payne, Duke Forever. I think both of those I was credited as just Matt Wood, and then probably Half-Life 2 was also Matt Wood. And right around that time, I just I don't know, it was like, Moby Games or something. I was looking at like names and and there's like you said, there's like 20 Matt Woods. It's a very common name, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I didn't realize there were that many people. So how do I just remember back, remember Michael J. Fox, right? So he had to use the J because of that was uh that was for other reasons, like for the guild or something. But I was like, oh, I should do that. I should put my middle initial there. And so I started doing it around, I think, probably episode 1 of Half-Life episode 1. Uh, so yeah,
And it stuck. Hmm.
and it's stuck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got to stick with it. You got to keep it. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for taking time out. I was worried it would be actually quite difficult to stay in contact with you because you don't like cell phones, right?
No, I hate them. Um, I think, uh, I mean, I kind of reluctantly have one, right? Because my family kind of needs to keep in contact with me, and
As you
and
do.
yeah. But I've got the ringer permanently turned off. I just don't ever answer my phone. My wife has gotten used to that. She'll call me occasionally, but like she knows that I'm not going to get back to her, for a little while. Luckily, I'm also glued to my phone most of the time, because of Twitter or whatever else. So
Ah, right.
I'm
Okay.
always checking it. Um, but yeah, talking on the phone, nah, I,
Not your
I hate it.
jam. Not your
No,
jam.
I mean, if you look at like the calls on my phone, it's just a constant red, like potential spam calls. Just like it's nobody legitimately calls me anyway. So why would I answer the phone?
So was that the case at Valve? Did you notify during your interview? Be like, hey, I don't like phones, just so you know.
But no. Uh, I mean, I had a cell phone back then. It was probably now back then, right? I had. Do you remember the Razor flip phones?
Yes,
That's
yes.
that's. I'm pretty sure that's what I had back then. But no, I didn't hate him as much back then. But see, that's the thing, is that back then people actually talk to each other on the phone, right? I mean, nowadays, who uses the phone? It's people trying to sell you something. So that's um but no, back then it wasn't a big deal. But when you get a desk, like you do at a job, and and they give you your phone, right? You've got your extension and all that stuff. And I kept that for a little while on my desk. And then thing that happens at Valve is you tend to move around a lot. Like you move your desks all over the place, and so you have to like break it down. So eventually we got wheels on our desks, and that made it easier. But like for a while, you had to like reconnect everything, and I just stopped setting up my phone every time I moved. So it's like, if you want to come talk to me, just come into the office and talk to me.
Mm.
So I
So
don't know. Yeah.
when you ended up working on Half Life 2, was
hmm
were you always brought on as the choreography guy to set up all the choreography scenes?
I was brought on. I think what happened. So what the way that I got onto Half-Life 2 was before that, I was working on an older version of Team Fortress that never shipped. And then when Half-Life 2 was in its final, like, we need to ship this, it was kind of an all hands on deck thing. And one of the things they asked me to do was that Half-Life 2, so they, at that time, you couldn't ship a game without like multiplayer, right? And you needed something else to kind of sweeten the deal. So there was a team that worked on Counter-Strike Source, right? And so I helped a little bit with that, just getting it going. And also Half-Life Source, right? So I and some other people basically took all of Half-Life and just made it work. And I only did the things that you like about Half-Life Source. Everything you didn't like about it was somebody else. So if you have any reservations about that, but so I got really intimate with all of the, at the time, scripted sequences and all of that, the things that existed in Half-Life, and was really into it. I really liked doing it. And somebody from that, at that point, the choreo team came to me and asked, like, hey, do you want to do more of this stuff, because we could really use level design help and some other help. And I was like, yeah, I said, sure, that sounds awesome. Because I was really into it. Like, I took I was in theater, in high school and stuff, and I'm not a big actor, but like, I appreciate the craft of it, and just sort of the blocking of, setting up stage performances, and making sure the audience has a particular view of the characters, and and how the view is set up, and the importance of positioning on the stage and that sort of thing. So I enjoyed trying to figure out, like, how do we make these scenes work in 3 dimensions, right? With a player who's probably just going to be walking around hitting things with their crowbar, right? But it was fun. It was fun.
So would you
Yeah.
act it out when you were trying to plan these scenes? Would you act it out like they would in a play, like in a theater?
No,
Or would
not.
you
I mean, because
craft it
I
obviously on paper or something?
I mean, it was definitely a team effort, right? So it's like there was the animators who were animating the scene were also versed in how to block these scenes out. So they would probably spend a lot more time figuring out, like, where things would go. And then I would take it and go, like, okay, well, when the player's here, when the player's here, when the player's here, like, how do we want these set up? And we would kind of design them um to, like, from optimal positions. And I, as a level designer, would try to encourage players to be in certain spots at certain times. And you know um but no, we wouldn't. I mean, the animators would probably, I'm sure, do a little bit on paper, but for me, it was always in engine. I tend to do everything in editor. Like, that's kind of my sketchbook. um yeah, it's just easier that way. Like, I prefer to see it, because it's like, you're going to run into a bunch of problems regardless of what you're doing, right? That are going to be engine specific or game specific or whatever. And it's just easier to do one pass and make it work in engine, and then figure it out. I mean, the tools are actually pretty easy to use, so it was nice. Yeah.
Can you think of one particular scene that was the most challenging though, of all those choreography scenes that you did? Because you did them also in episode 1 and 2 as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, most of them, as time went on, there were more people who were learning how to do them, so it wasn't just me. So by episode 2, I did probably less than half of them. um, like, the whole first half of episode 2 was done by other people, and they did a great job. What was the most difficult? The thing about the scenes is that we always tried to do something new in every scene, so it was like every scene had something difficult about it. um, the the dog scene in the scrapyard, that wasn't heavy on choreo, but like the the logic for that one in particular, for me, I I sort of broke the entity system in how much logic I was writing. This was before I started to code, so I was doing everything through logic, uh, entities in the map, and I remember basically hitting the limit on what was capable, and had to go to a programmer and say, can you up this limit? Um, and that ended up being pretty difficult. The other one I think was difficult for us was, or for me, um, so Eli's lab, which doesn't seem that difficult, was challenging in that we were trying to encourage downtime. We were trying to set up the scene so that it was, a scene that plays out, but you also we wanted to give the player freedom to kind of explore at the same time. So it was, and that's the first time I had done something like that. And I remember being really, it was difficult at the time to figure out and to make work. Um, and the hilarious thing about that one was I remember stressing about it. And one of the very first play tests we did was someone's son brought in. I don't remember who right now, but like, so we brought him in. We sat him down, explained the play test and just watched him play. And so he enters the airlock, with Mossman talking to him, and goes into the elevator, and uh, he's going down the elevator, and all he's doing in the elevator is like banging things with his crowbar, right? So it's like there's stuff to look at, stuff to do, um, you know, things that we expect the player to pay attention to, and he's just like clank, 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 clank. And we're like, oh man, like I hope he doesn't do this the whole play test, right? And the elevator reaches the bottom floor, and the doors open, and Eli comes out and says his stuff, and he immediately goes, oh, and like runs over to Eli. We're like, oh man, he's so excited. He he kneels down and just starts banging on Eli's leg with his crowbar, like ding, 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 ding. And it's like, the scene's going on, they're talking, and like we're like, this is a disaster, like, and I remember people are like, well, can we constrain the player in some way? Can we take his weapon away or whatever? And we're like, no, we can't, we shouldn't do that, we can't do that, we want the player to have the freedom. But what we do after every playtest is that we interview who's playtesting, and they say, or we say to them like, well, okay, can you tell us about what happened in the scene, what they said, blah blah blah. And he just rattled it all off, right? Like, he was paying attention, he was listening. And I think it was a really cool example for us for how some players will they respond to certain stimulus differently than other players. Like, audio versus visual. There's different ways that people kind of take in information, and we'll typically like try to give that information in as many ways as possible, because not everybody absorbs it the same way, right? But anyway, that was a really funny story where we were stressed about it, and then he comes in and it's clank, 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 and it was like, oh, disaster. But it was fun. It turned out all right.
Yeah, well, hey, the game was a complete success, so you must be stoked. It's a good thing to have on the CV. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's it was amazing to work on it, right? I mean, I feel really privileged to have been asked to work on it, and continued to work on it, because I mean, having that chance to work on Half-Life, is great, but like, in that environment, every person really was able to do something special, right? Because the team, it wasn't that big, so everybody was doing multiple jobs, and everybody was integral to all the stuff, all the cool stuff that happened in that. But I mean, like, the people that worked on that game were just, I mean, they really were top of their field, right? I mean, it was one of those cases where you feel really well, not only intimidated, but you feel like you don't belong there, right?
Imposter syndrome.
Very much imposter syndrome. It's a common thing that I think happens with people, especially at Valve, is that they feel very inadequate, because they're like, wow, these people are really smart and really creative and good at their job. So yeah, I'm really lucky that I got a chance to work on that, for sure.
Did Gabe ever come through and look at your work, or the choreography work that you did? Because even by that stage, he was more hands off, wasn't he? Like he was moving more into the hands off role and
Yeah,
leaving the game designers to do whatever it is that they needed to do.
yeah, he was mostly hands off. Yeah, I mean, there were a few times, he would come through, but honestly, like in my 17 years there, I didn't interact a whole lot with Gabe. Uh, we never hit it off that well early on, and I think I I I ended up avoiding him most of my career there, and he wasn't anxious to talk to me either. Um, so yeah, not so much, not so much. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of an instance of. I can't really think of one. No,
That's all right.
never really did it. Yeah.
So with Portal 2, you pretty much came in during the home stretch, right? Like towards the end
Yeah,
when with the co-op and redesigning and testing everything.
that's a kind of a common thread in my career at Valve is they there were people who like to say like, hey, can you stop what you're doing and come help us ship this thing? So I think I became known as somebody who helped ship products. Um, but it was something I got good at, like figuring out like, okay, here are all the things. How do we turn that into something we could ship, right? Um, but yeah, in Portal 2, there was a small team, just like 2 or 3 people, I think, um, working on co-op, trying to figure out what it was, right? Like what it could be. And so they had lots of experiments and um, a bunch of levels that were amazing. They had figured out most of the mechanics by that point. Um, and but just they couldn't finish it because those people were also doing single player levels, and it was just the logistics didn't work out, right? So they didn't have somebody to finish it up. So they asked me and a few other folks. It was like Gatan Babar and G Barnett, and like we were the three main ones, and then we obviously had like some amazing animators and modelers and other folks helping us out, the sound people, and then Eric and Chet with writing, of course. But yeah, so we came in and basically took you know uh, a string of levels and mechanics and just figured out how to turn it into a thing, um, and went and created like the hub for it and the whole structure around it. Um, we got the robots. I think when we first started playing, it was still the Chells. There was like a Chell, and then they had another name for it. It was like a blonde Chell. Those were the two characters you played because I didn't think they figured out what it was yet. Um, so that was before the Atlas and Peabody, and so we got them in, and then that's when we really started exploring, like what does it mean to have the robots? Like, well, we can explode them and make it fun, and uh, have the co-op emotes that like the shaking hands and all that stuff. And yeah, and that was honestly Portal 2. I think was probably one of the more memorable, enjoyable uh, game design experiences for me. Like working with that group of people under those constraints was pretty great. Like we crunched like crazy because that's we had to. That's what you do. But it was really fun. Like it was that fun kind of, like we're doing fun stuff. We're solving problems. We're working together. We worked together really well. I thought at the time, and um, it turned out to be something we were all pretty proud of actually. Like it was pretty cool. So yeah, it's another one where I'm glad people really enjoy it because it was a lot of fun to make.
So you would have had to make a lot of reference to the single player, the campaign when you were designing the co-op. You'd have to refer to it a lot, I suppose.
No, we ignored it
Completely.
completely. Yeah,
So
yeah, we
how would you even know what the mechanics and all of that are then if you hadn't even
well,
referred to
so
that? Or were you just aware of what the mechanics were going to be and then you just implement them somehow?
yeah, we were aware of what was there. We had all of the pieces like in some form or another, uh like working in the co-op part, right? And I think the stuff that we didn't have any anything for when we first started was any of the paint stuff. So we implemented most of the paint stuff, and but yeah, as far as the story and like how that all played out, we just didn't pay attention. Like we kind of treated it as its own thing that
Mm.
just kind of shared mechanics. Because a lot of cases we had to kind of solve things our own way because you've got 4 portals instead of 2, right? It changes a bunch of things, and um, yeah, so we just didn't we didn't pay attention, which was great because like that means I got to play test for them and be surprised, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like sort of the evolution of like Wheatley's stuff was just amazing to see. That's so cool. Yeah, it's rare as a developer you get to experience things like as a player, right? So I
Yeah, I
appreciated
suppose.
that.
Well, that's a good thing. If you had no reference to the main campaign at all, you can go in blind and enjoy the game, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you were designing that, were you using a whiteboard? I remember Josh Wire was using a whiteboard to map out designs.
Yeah, that one we did. We ended up using the whiteboard a lot, because that was the 3 of us, like 3, once we took over, like me and Gotham and Jeep would spend a bunch of time like going, I had this weird idea for this interaction or this puzzle, and then we'd have our scratch whiteboard of, trying to like explain it to each other. And we would do that, yeah, pretty often. Um, but for us, because everything was very done very quickly, it was more like just using it to express our idea to the other person, right? So that way they could contribute and we could kind of get consensus and see if it's going to work. And then, but like the thing with the whiteboard is that it's mostly just about sharing ideas. And then the real work happens when you put it in the game, right? Like you want to get things into the game, or from my perspective, is you want to get things into the game as soon as possible because you know it's fine to talk about something on a whiteboard, but um, once you get it in game, then you can show people how it's going to work. You can test how it's going to work. You can, you know, it's just a lot more effective that way, right? And in some cases, I mean, obviously it's going to be more work to get it in the game, but like usually not that much more work. And you always see it as a way to get it in and learn a bunch of stuff, even if it doesn't work. So yeah, whiteboards are useful, but honestly, like I have a whiteboard behind me that I bought. You can see that I haven't put it up yet. I don't know if you can see it on the, yeah,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
see it. Uh, but then again, it's like I guess it doesn't really count because I'm in my home office. But but yeah, we would have some whiteboards, but just not a whole lot. I remember seeing, um, I mean, in the context of Valve, there were some whiteboards that were pretty epic. Like on episode 2, somebody designed like the whole route, and put it on the whiteboard. And I don't know what stage that was in because I was working on episode 1 at the time when they were doing this work on episode 2. Um, but if they did that like at the stage of like we haven't built any of the levels yet, that's really impressive because for me, like I wouldn't even be able to conceptualize that, right? Like I have to build some things and then put them together to make sense of it. So I don't know.
How do you get that balance right with puzzles, right? Because when you're creating the puzzle, there's no way of knowing how difficult it is. Like when you're implementing parts of the game, you know what the implementation is. You know how to solve the puzzle, for example, right?
Yeah.
So besides from
Yeah.
playtesting, like how do you get that difficulty right? So somebody doesn't get
Yeah.
frustrated with the puzzle.
I mean, that's $1 million question, right? I mean, it's one of those things where, when you make a combat game, you have a lot of dials that you can turn to scale the experience for different players, right? So it's like someone who's plays Counter-Strike for a living versus someone who's never played a video game in their life. It's like you can figure out how to turn those dials to make it work for them. When it comes to a puzzle, you can't, right? Like a puzzle is a puzzle. I don't know of any. I mean, you probably could, but we never figured out how. Because I don't know of anybody who designs a puzzle that is scalable for different players, right? Like the puzzle has to work for everybody. So, I mean, the cop out answer, right, is that you just do a lot of playtesting.
Mm.
But I mean, leading up to that, there's always this thought process of um, what is my ultimate puzzle? What is my ultimate challenge for the player, right? And usually it's like you're trying to think of like what is your tentpole feature, like what is your gimmick or your cool thing that you want to try and do, and you figure out the ultimate challenge for that. And sometimes you don't realize it's the ultimate challenge. Sometimes it ends up being like the next to ultimate challenge. But when you do that, you start designing something, but then you inevitably, if you play test it, you inevitably go, okay, there are like 3 or 4 things in here which the players don't really understand or know about. So now you start designing the lead up to that puzzle, right? And you start explaining these little bits and decisions that plant the seed in the player's head that they like. There's a sweet spot in there where you say you teach a player how to do a thing, and you want them to forget about it just long enough that when they get to the puzzle and utilize that thing that they were taught, they're like, oh, aha, I'm a genius, right? Like, I can't believe I thought of this. This is, this is such a, I'm so smart. And, um, like that's what you want to be able to do. Um, but, everybody thinks differently. The advantage to doing co-op, which was great, was that you had 2 people, right? And what we realized, actually, this is another thing, was that we realized that when we started designing things the first time, uh, we were designing them with sort of what we had done in the past, like for a single person. But once you throw 2 people at a problem, suddenly those problems become a lot easier, right? Because people tend to talk to each other and you work out problems faster when you're talking to someone else, right?
Mm.
Like I do it even when it's like I'll have a problem. Did you ever have this ever happen to you where it's like, oh man, I've got a problem and you can't figure it out, and you start to explain it to someone else, and halfway through explaining it, you're like, I got it, right? Like it's what programmers call the rubber ducking or something like that, where it's like you have a little rubber duck on your desk and you just explain the problem to the rubber duck, and then you'll inevitably like solve it. So even that alone, like having 2 people, you have another person to kind of talk things through, and then things became a lot easier, than they would have if it were just you. So
Yeah.
so it was. I don't know if I answered your question, but like it was
Well,
it
yeah,
was
you
tricky.
yeah, it's very tricky. I mean, I've sometimes played games like Portal and Zelda, and I overcomplicate the puzzle. I'm overcomplicating it, and then you find the answer, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was so simple. So and
Yeah,
sometimes
sometimes that happens too. Yeah.
yeah, so you can kind of flip between feeling real dumb and a genius depending on the puzzle.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, we always shoot for genius if we can manage it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were one of the brainchild, or the brain children, I suppose, of Counter Strike Go, right? That was something that you
I would
helped gestate.
I wouldn't say that. I Well, let me give you the history of what it was. So I worked on Counter-Strike Source in a small capacity, and then somewhere around, I think it was before Left 4 Dead, um, me and another guy who's still working on Counter-Strike Go, we started thinking about what like Counter-Strike 2 would be. Um, and that was around the time that I think Modern Warfare had come out,
Hmm.
right? And we were like, and we didn't, it's like we looked at that and said, wow, you know, these guys did something amazing, right? We don't think it's necessarily right for Counter-Strike, but is that a direction we can take Counter-Strike, something like that? Um, and so we started doing a bunch of experiments, and um, just honestly, we spent a bunch of time just sort of uh, breaking apart Modern Warfare and just trying to understand what, you know, how they were as successful as they were. Excuse me. And then like most projects do at Valve, I think I probably got asked to ship another game, probably Left 4 Dead. And that kind of took on a back burner. But then, um, you know, jump forward to maybe it was like 2011 or something like that. And the other guy who I was working with, Ido Magal, he had started up what was Counter-Strike Go. And I don't know if it was called Go at the time, but I think it started out as um, an Xbox port. So they started working on that with an external team, and I think they started to realize that this is like, why shouldn't we turn this into the next Counter-Strike, right? Like this was something that was, could potentially turn into a great thing. And so that's around the time that I started working on it. He asked me to come. I think he asked me. I don't remember. Maybe I just jumped on myself. um, but yeah, I was really excited about doing it, and yeah, that was sort of and it was in a weird spot, right? Because even when we shipped, like we weren't happy with it. It felt like what people kind of accused it of being, is that it felt like, it's like, well, this started as a port, right? And it kind of did. So it's like we worked really hard to try and steer that into what Counter-Strike eventually became, right? But it took a while. It took a while to get there. But it did. Yeah.
Because I would think that first-person shooters are probably one of the hardest genres, primarily because the genre seems to evolve so quickly. I mean, it's very oversaturated now. It probably wasn't at the time when you first brought it out, but I mean, to try and keep up to date with everything, because obviously there's so many shooters now, and it's evolving so rapidly. And was it? I mean,
Yeah.
you looked at Modern Warfare, but as time went on, um, were you looking at other games? I mean, by the time you ship the game, I mean
No.
the shooter genre had probably already evolved.
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind that, like, so right when Modern Warfare came out, it's like, and probably before, I don't know if they're the ones that sort of popularized it, but maybe Dave Defeat did, but like, the aim down sights was the normal thing, right? It's like, pressing alt fire, I'm going to aim down sights, I'm going to put a gun, up in my screen, it's going to auto zoom, it's going to slow me down, right? And it's like, that was the standard at the time. And when we were looking at Modern Warfare, it wasn't so much like, what did they do for gameplay? Honestly, it was like we were focusing more on um, how they approached the single player and those experiences, right? Uh, like how their enemies worked, how their checkpoints worked, how their ammo management worked, and how their damage system worked, how the um, all of that stuff. Like, and it was more of a, it's not how can we emulate this, it's what is it they're doing, what are the decisions that they made that worked for them, that we can deconstruct and think about in the context of Counter-Strike, right? um, and when we continued to work on Counter-Strike, we didn't have any concern about what other first person games were doing that much. It was more like, how do we make sure that we're true to what Counter-Strike is with the next iteration, right? um like, because I mean, when we first came out, like, I remember there were people who were just annoyed, like, this is a game and it doesn't have aim down sights, right? Like, what the hell is this, right? And so I mean, that was, a generation of people who were really into things like Modern Warfare. um but we weren't really concerned with what other people were doing that much. I mean, unless it was something that just knocked it out of the park. I mean, the thing is that Respawn, um, that generation of Respawn, they were the leagues above everybody else, and so we were paying attention to them. But it was more like I said, it's like more like figuring out what it is that they did that was successful, and then recontextualizing that in Counter-Strike's world, and sometimes it just doesn't recontextualize, right? So it's like it's not really useful, but it's always a good experiment to figure out. And I still think Counter-Strike they've kept their own identity, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah. Still got a massive
Counter-Strike
following.
is, yeah, I think that's it's because they haven't succumbed to a bunch of modern designs, right? Counter-Strike works, right? And it has worked. It's like, I don't want to. A lot of people use like the chess, argument, right? It's like, don't mess with chess, and I don't want to put Counter-Strike aside chess, but there are a lot of things about Counter-Strike that um, it's really hard to think of changing, right? I mean, there's certain things about Counter-Strike, you change them, it's just not Counter-Strike anymore.
Yeah.
Um, it, I mean, it's evolved. Don't get me wrong, right? I mean, 1.6 versus Source versus Go, they're all different games. Once you get to know them, right? I mean, if you're a player of those games, they feel very different. Um, but I think that's one of the things that's really a signature of Counter-Strike, is that the feel is very distinctive, right? Like the feel isn't a bunch of these mechanics coming in to create the soup of mechanics. It's much more subtle than that, right? Like it's tied to the movement, it's tied to the engine, it's tied to the subtleties and how the network code works, right? Stuff like that. So I think, yeah, it's honestly, I think that's the reason Counter-Strike took so long for it to have a sequel or another game, is that I think there was just a lot of people like at Valve who didn't quite understand what Counter-Strike was, and to be honest, like it took me a while to really get it, right? Like to really get what Counter-Strike is, what it is that people really love about it, and hold in high regard. Um, so it's a special project, it's a special game. It's um, yeah, I spent a long time on Counter-Strike as well, but yeah, it's a
It's
good thing.
it's an interesting thought process in terms of when you're creating a game, how much inspiration do you take from somewhere else as opposed to just using your own original ideas? Well, that's even if they are original. You might think they're original and then you've actually subconsciously borrowed from something else.
I think, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, right? Like, you know, there's no such thing as an original idea, right? Um, again, there's a funny example. I remember sort of experiencing this firsthand. Sorry, I'm going to diverge into children for just a second.
Okay.
Um, when so I have kids, and like when we were figuring out names for kids, you have names in your head, like you have a list of names, and um, then you start going out into the world and seeing what's popular, what other people are thinking about. You're like, oh crap, right? Like I thought I was being really creative, but it turns out we're all just a product of our environment, right? Like
Yeah.
we're all everything that you know we come up with is just something that had a seed planted in us a while back. Um, but I mean, but to answer your question more specifically, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to stay up to date on games, right? On what's happening in the gaming world and design in all sorts of things. And I mean, a lot of what I think I think it's more like being aware of what exists so you can choose not to use it, right? I mean, like it's better to be aware of whether it's a mechanic or it's a specific interface uh, type design, knowing that something exists and experiencing it and making a conscious decision for a particular reason not to use it, is much better than just putting your head in the sand, right? I mean, because you're not going to make smart decisions that way. But you know I guess my approach to the games have always been about trying to stand out a little bit, right? I mean, partly it's about, for me at least, trying something new. And usually if I'm trying something new, it's new to others as well, right? So um yeah. But I mean, like anything, right? Like well, here's a good example. So when I started my game, Little Kitty Big City, um, you know, I was like, why isn't there a game that you can play as a cat? Right? It's like that's the honest question, right? Like uh my kids and I, we were like, this should exist as a game, right? Like, why don't I make this game? I just want to do silly things as a cat. I want to like, do things from a cat's perspective and interact with different things. Um, and hey, it turns out there was another game, possibly more that was getting developed, right? And it's like, you know, um, it's like when one movie studio, does one movie, and then another movie studio does a really similar movie, right? Like Ants and Bugs Life, right? You remember that they both came out at the same
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
and it's a product of like not necessarily what's trending, but like sometimes things get, it's just there's things get greenlit, around the same time for similar reasons because of whatever. But yeah, so it's hard to be original, that's for sure. Um, so I think just the right thing to do is to find your niche, right? Find the thing that you you want to explore that's the most interesting to you, and hopefully other people find it interesting as well.
So with your current game, Little Kitty Big City,
Mhm.
when you started it out, has it turned out the way? Hey, yeah, good plug. I didn't even intend to do that. That was good timing. Um, did you always intend it for it to be the way it's turning out now, or has there been like a lot of trial and error with it?
It definitely trial and error. I mean, um, so the history of how it came to be was it really literally was my kids and I. So um, I was doing little projects with my kids, teaching them the program, doing some game design, and we were just doing fun little things. And we would do these, you know, kid centric, you know, uh, brainstorming sessions. And one of those was, you know, like we have cats, and like what if the cat got outside? What do the cats do? Right? I think we saw a video one time of like a cat with a camera on it. It's like, this is amazing. Like, why, I'd love to explore the environment as a cat, right? And what's more fun to explore than a city? So we were just like, we should totally do this. So I had some assets that I bought from an asset store and just sort of mocked it up. And it was like my 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 strategy was, I'm just going to make this thing that's like top down, and see if there's a vibe there, right? Like see if there's something that feels kind of cool and and fun about it. And I just made a little thing and put some ambient city soundscapes on it, and threw it up on Twitter. It's just like, hey, look at this funny thing that we made. Like, we might do this with the kids, and and then like it got shared like tens of thousands of times. I'm not sure, but that was the first time something had gone viral for me, right? And it was like, whoa, people really do love cats, don't they? um, and I mean, don't make this. I don't think it's a good thing for people to be making decisions about what to do based on what goes viral necessarily. But in this case, it was like we sat back and went, oh, okay, can we do something with this? I mean, we meaning me and my kids, and then eventually just me. Is there a game here? And so it was at that point, it was figuring out like, well, what can you do as a cat? What are other aspects of things, from okay, to be honest, like, so part of it was like, what can you do as a cat? But then there was also this other part of me going, man, I really love like, architectural design, like urban sprawl and density, especially of places like Tokyo or Taipei, right? Like I really love that because I had just taken a trip to the Taipei and took a bunch of pictures. And how the buildings were, how like the history of how these things got built up, and just a bunch of stuff. So at the time it was like, okay, cat, people like cats. I'd love to explore this idea of a cat city. Oh, I'd really love to explore making a city, and doing all these fun things. Is there a game there? And yeah, and so I just kind of jumped in and started experimenting with things. um and with the absence of like typical uh traditional gameplay things that people sort of lean on, right, which is a lot of combat uh type systems, or survival. At one point I was thinking like, oh, maybe this could be a survival game. um but eventually I just felt like the the audience for this is, it's an everybody audience, right? Like it's a do you love cats, right? Like, do you like cats? Like, that's the audience. That's kind of what I wanted it to be. um and so that helped drive like what decisions I'd made for things you would do in the game. um and then on top of that, it's like started coming up with fun characters and hired a amazing writer, and so it was just interesting characters that you would meet and talk to, and they'd have their own problems and they were quirky, and so that made it a lot of fun. you know
Mm.
I was
So,
chasing the fun for me.
yeah. I mean, because I've watched quite a bit of footage, but is it like an open world game, or is it going to be a bit more linear, even though that it's sort of set in a city?
It's open world. It's more like it's sort of a mini open world, right?
Right.
So it's a city where you it's vertical as well. So it's like there's buildings and you climb buildings and you gain the ability to climb buildings. um so it's you know I mean, it's primarily me. I have some help with it from another level designer, but I don't have a big team working on environment, right? It's like traditionally indie games with solo developers, it's like, well, they'll take an engine and they'll take like a terrain engine and make an island, and hey, they're done, right? It's like that's it's cheap, it's easy, it's like and here I am going like, oh, I'm going to create a dense, couple of city blocks or whatever, and I'm like,
It must take
you're an
so much
idiot.
time.
Yeah. But it's so much fun. um so it's open in that it's not linear. You're not forced to go one place to another. And I thought that was an important thing to try in the game. And I've never done an open world game before, even if it's this size. So there are a lot of challenges with that. but but yeah. But like any open world game, right, like there's a linearity to it at the beginning that sort of eases you into things, right? And then it opens up. So um, and that's just to make sure the players aren't completely lost. And,
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Are you referencing any other open world games just to get an idea of scope and how you should construct it? I mean, there's quite a
yeah, I
few
mean,
open world games now.
yeah, I mean, probably one of the bigger influences for the approach is a short hike. So like that's just a little game that I think is just such a tight package that's has some amazing decisions made in there, where it's open but it's designed and it pulls the player enough in certain directions to where it feels um you don't get lost. You feel like there's something always to do, and you always feel like you're going in the right direction even though you can go anywhere, and sometimes there's the illusion of choice, and um but there always feels like there's choice to go wherever. So there's that's a big inspiration for me. And then of course, I'm a big fan of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, right? Like,
Ah,
it's
yeah.
a huge game that's hugely influential. And I don't want to say my game is anything remotely close to that, but like there are a lot of decisions they made that I think are just really good ones that I will definitely, lean on, right? To help me decide how to approach some of these problems. So,
Hey, I don't think you're the only one. I think a lot of
no, I
designers.
know it's yeah. You look at a lot of indie games, right? It's like, oh, it's like mini Legends of Zelda, which I think is great, honestly.
Well, even
Like,
AAA games now too. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
you can see it. You're
yeah,
like, oh yeah, you can see where the influence is. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. That's such a good game, though. I mean, like they nailed so much stuff. God, I'm looking forward to the next one.
yeah. So am I. So am I. Yeah,
Yeah.
bit of a wait though. But how do you deal with the fact that you're a game designer and you have to play games to keep yourself up to date as well? I mean, where do you find the time?
It's a good question. Yeah. A lot of honestly, like these days, I don't play as much games as I used to, just
Yeah.
because, I've got 3 kids. So, they all go to school. I've got activities. I've got my own job, right? Like, not only am I making a game, I'm also doing the managing. I'm doing the producing. I'm doing the business. It's
Hmm.
like it's I mean, I'm a workaholic. I work too much. But I fit things in every once in a while, like things that I really want to play, usually at night, before bed. My wife goes to bed, and I'll play some games. I was playing Potionomics recently, um, little shop uh, shopkeeper game that's amazing. Um, but yeah, it's tough. It's really tough to find time. Usually, it's one of those, like, okay, I've got X number of slots in the day, you know, and 8 of them are filled up with, sleep. Well, what if I just, move the sleep out of the
Yeah.
slot? And it's like, can I survive on 6 hours of sleep?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also started working out again because, like, the pandemic just, you know, turned me into a big couch potato, and needed to get off my butt again. So I had to find time for that.
So do you just, I mean, because one of the things I have to do, because I'm similar to you, I don't have that much time, but I basically have a whole year and I'll set aside time just for specific games. I'll be like, okay, this is how many games I can play in the year, more than likely. So I'll just set time aside for these particular ones.
You're a lot more organized than I am. Yeah, I have a backlist that's like, oh, someday I'll find time for that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
no, I should do that. I should do that. I should have, like, schedule out my play time. No, usually my process is like, I'll be like, okay, I'll buy that game, and then I'll get to that in the near future, and then some other game will come out that I'm really interested in, and I'll just start playing that one immediately, and then this one will never get played. Yeah, that's my bad process for it.
Yeah.
But
So how do you keep yourself motivated? Because you're your own boss now, right? I mean, even at
yeah,
Valve, yeah, there was a non-hierarchical structure in ways, and everybody's kind of everyone's boss. But at the same time, I mean, you are responsible for the game in every aspect of it, right? You have to find the motivation from somewhere.
yeah, I mean, the buck stops with me, I guess, is the term, right? I have all the responsibility. I've never had a problem with motivation. Like, that's one of the things, honestly, like at Valve, I kind of felt like I had too much motivation, right? Like, sometimes it was like, calm, slow down a little bit. And that would frustrate me because I would want to do stuff that I couldn't do, or um, you know, people didn't like that I was doing it. And so I've never had a huge problem with motivation. I'm more on the side of, I've got a backlog of things that I want to do, right? Like, I've got 3 games in the pipe, right? Not counting the ones that I worked on and haven't finished yet that I want to get to. And, you know, every once in a while I'll just need a see, maybe this is a problem. I don't know, right? Like, because what I'll do is, it's like, oh, I need a break from my current game, and then I'll just work on another game, right?
Another game, yeah.
So yeah, it's I don't know. There's way too much to do and not enough time to do it. That's always been my problem. Yeah.
Would you
I don't
say
know how to
you're good?
relax either, Reese. So
Really?
no, I don't.
That's a common problem though. I've
Yeah.
noticed that a lot of devs find it hard to shut off. Like you can't shut
I
off the brain. I mean, you
can't.
must have ideas all the time.
I mean, I can't help it. Or I mean, it's, you watch a movie, you're engrossed in the movie, right? So those are the kind of things where I can kind of at least focus on something entertaining, but otherwise, I don't know. Is it a blessing? Is it a curse? I'm not sure. It's like I remember back when my wife and I started hiking, just like, hey, let's get out, let's do some hiking. And I hadn't done a whole lot up to that point. And we're doing these hiking, and I started thinking about like, oh, like who's making these trails, and like how were they made, and how long ago, and like, who are the trailblazers, and like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I was a trailblazing game? And it's like just I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's just little ideas, right? Like, it's just fun to think about them, but it's hard to shut it off. Yeah, that's true.
Do you manage to get much sleep?
I do. I love sleep.
That's
Yeah.
good. Well, that's good at least. It would be very bad if you couldn't even get to sleep because you had all these ideas all the time.
No, I that's another thing is that people, I remember my people get jealous when they find out that like I can just fall asleep. Like if I lie down and and I'm even remotely tired, I'll just go out. I love sleeping, and it's weird. It's like I'll think and think and think, but it doesn't keep me up, right? Like I think until the point where my body says, okay, that's enough, and then bam, I just fall asleep.
And then you just KO. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, sleep is good. I like sleep, like lots of sleep. I'll sleep. That's another problem though, is that like if there's no children to wake me up, or nobody there to wake me up, or an alarm or whatever, I'll sleep for 12 hours.
Really?
Yeah. I sleep a lot if given the chance.
Well,
I don't know.
It's probably your body just wanting to relax, I suppose.
Maybe. Yeah, it's like, oh, finally I get a chance to relax.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure talking to you, imparting your knowledge into me and others, I'm sure. If anyone wants to keep up to date with you and your game, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah. So if they want to check out Little Kitty Big City, they can go to littlekittybigcity.com, or the Steam page. Just search for Little Kitty Big City on Steam and wishlist it, please. And yeah.
Release date? Any release
date?
date?
We don't have one yet.
That's probably a good thing, because then you'll end up with crunch, won't you? As soon as you give a release date.
Yeah. I've learned my lesson. Yeah, on that before. I made a side comment one time. Somebody asked me, and I'm like, oh, I think I'm going to try to get it out X, blah blah blah, and of course that's what went on all of the articles at that point. So,
right. Yeah.
No more.
Yeah. TBA. So, there you go. TBA.
There you go. Yeah, cats don't have deadlines, so
yeah.
No deadline.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that is the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe.
All right. Thanks, Reese. See ya.
See ya.